Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, always glad to have you with us. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about one of the most iconic companies in Rhode Island's industrial history, Brown and Sharpe. There's a new book out chronicling the history of Brown and Sharpe, and we're going to chat with the author about that later on. But right now, I'm very pleased to be joined by a new member of Rhode Island's corporate business community, Don LeBlanc. He is the president of Vistaprint Corporate Solutions, which is a unit of a larger company, which we're going to talk about. Don, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Ted.
So let's dive right in, and I actually think some people will be familiar with Vistaprint, the company,
Sure.
You know, your consumer-facing part of the company and everything. But for those who aren't, tell us a little about the company as well as your division, the Corporate Solutions division.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we're part of a parent company called Cimpress, which I'm sure most people are not familiar with, but it's actually a collection of about 20 different brands across the world. The largest is Vistaprint here in the U.S., but we have brands in Europe, in India, China, Japan, etc. Within the U.S., we've had Vistaprint for, I'd say, 20 years. It was founded by Robert Keane, our founder and still CEO of Cimpress overall. And it was, as you said, really founded for more small business consumers. So really, business cards was the iconic product that everyone knew,
yes,
but expanding into a bunch of different areas in what we call mass customization. And that is really, how do I, instead of ordering a quantity of 25 or 100 or 1,000, could I order one? Could I order one custom mug and get that delivered at a low price, high quality? And that's really what the company was founded on. So very successful, as I said. About 2 years ago, we decided to create a new division, which I'm responsible for, which is to go after the corporate market. A little different. It's going after larger businesses. They might have 50 or 500 or 1,000 employees.
So like our own Channel 12 business cards here.
Exactly. So, and how do we serve them in different ways?
I don't have the power to give you the contract, I should say.
We'll
sorry.
take it. Maybe by the end of the interview
yeah,
you
maybe.
So if we do this well. But it's really about figuring out what do those customers need. And a lot of it is the same product, quite frankly. It's business cards, postcards, flyers, shirts, etc. But it also includes a software component on the front end, where you have to allow your employees to order from that single portal. So we're really a combination of a technology company and a printing company targeting mid to large size businesses.
It's interesting. I've been amazed. I've mentioned on the show in recent episodes that I've been playing a wedding, and the amount of customization you can do on these websites if you're ordering any kind of paper, you know, for us, invitations and stuff, but whether it's business cards or anything else, you can let people do, it seems like almost anything at this point, and if they order in relatively small quantities sometimes too.
Absolutely. And it's not just paper products. It's, and I'm sure if you've seen this for weddings, there's lots of other things you can customize.
They'll sell you anything for a wedding.
They will. So it's apparel, it's hard goods, it's a lot of what we'd call promotional products, things that people give away at trade shows or events. And again, they used to have to order 500 or 5,000 to go to a trade show, and now you can do these really small quantities. So if you happen to be a one-off, you might be a large company with 100 different locations. Every location can get their piece customized with their local name of the branch or name of the individual within there. So it's a huge macro trend across retailing and manufacturing. And Cimpress and Vistaprint, and now hopefully Vistaprint Corporate is on the forefront of it.
Now we think of this as the age of digital and everybody doing everything online, everything's an app, everything's on your phone. You're in the physical product space in the end. I know you have to have the technology to make it, but is the demand still strong for physical things? You know, whether it's a business card or the pen you get at the trade show.
Sure. So there's probably there is a macro trend to digital from physical, where you say, well, do I really need to give someone a business card? I could send them my contacts and go to LinkedIn and so forth. That's definitely a trend in the market. But just as important, and if not stronger, is exactly what you said, is people can now go out and customize something online that they couldn't before. So you're almost putting the design capabilities into the millions and millions of people who before couldn't do it themselves. And that's actually creating a lot of additional demand. So before you wouldn't even think about customizing your own mug. Now you actually can and order it and get it delivered for $10 or less. So that's something that's creating a lot of demand in the market that didn't exist before.
So we're taping this summer 2017 because just a few months back you announced plans to establish Vistaprint Corporate's national sales office here in Providence. The pitch was 125 workers by 2020. Is that still the plan a few months later?
That still is the plan. Happy to announce we opened the office roughly in July, right downtown. I was just telling you in Westminster. And it's actually, we've got about 15 employees, so we're right on track for year one. We're hoping to get 40 by year one and continuing out each year to get to that 125 and hopefully beyond that, quite frankly. We'd love to have hundreds and hundreds here in Providence. but from a 3-year perspective, that's what we're targeting.
And so the people so it's a sales office, so these are the people, I assume they're traveling a lot actually then, talking to companies, trying to build up the business and get those corporate clients.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The way we're really launching is more what we call inside sales. So these are folks who are really on the phone. So part of why it's a national sales office based in Providence, which is clearly not the center of the U.S. or the center of North America, is because they're going after a lot of these mid-market companies with phone-based relationships. So rather than flying out to Chicago or Los Angeles or Dallas, they have phone-based relationships. And by and large, most companies are comfortable with that, certainly at the mid-market level. So we're going to have hundreds of people who are calling on these accounts across the country from Providence, but really over the phone. And that's, over time we will add in some more outside folks, and they might be dotted around different parts of the country or Canada as well. But our focus right now is kind of inside sales, people on the phone. And
jobs posted right now on your website? Are they open
absolutely.
Jobs?
We're actively recruiting, actively hiring. As I said, we've got our first maybe 15 on board. We're looking to get probably another 20 to 30 in the next 6 months. So we'd love to be hiring lots of people in Providence.
All right, so you can log on right now and apply if you're looking for a new gig. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Don LeBlanc about what they're doing at Vistaprint and what brought them to Providence. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Later on this week, we're going to talk about the history of Brown and Sharpe, which is chronicled in a new book just out. It's a very important part of business history here in Rhode Island and fascinating read. But right now, very pleased to be joined by Don LeBlanc. We're talking about Vistaprint Corporate Solutions, which is part of Vistaprint, which is part of Simpris. Did I get it all right
there?
Yes. It's like the Russian doll bot that come apart. And they're opening an office in Providence. They've just announced they're actually open now, and we're talking about that. So why Vistaprint's in Waltham, Mass,
yes.
Not too far up the road.
Yep.
Why did you decide to put this office here in Providence?
So we realized pretty quickly that we wanted to scale this sales office and start hiring dozens and then hundreds of people. And certainly one option would be to stay in Waltham, stay in the Metro Boston area. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's very expensive real estate, a very expensive labor. We actually had a reasonable number of people that were living more down towards Providence as well and having really tough commutes trying to get up there. So we started to look at, well, it doesn't have to be in Waltham, it could be someplace else, and did a scan of different cities, primarily in New England, although some lower cost states as well. And Providence pretty quickly got to the top of our list in the due diligence, and I think for a couple reasons. Number one, first and foremost, was the talent in the area. So we really want for our sales positions either new college graduates, and you have a bunch of them in Providence, or people who have some sales experience, still maybe relatively earlier in their career, but have that background. And we found that the labor pool in Providence was a great fit for what we were looking to hire. So if you don't have that, you don't even have to go to number two. Beyond that, we felt like the improvements in the city in the past few years have made it a really desirable place for people. And not just to hire new people, to the extent we want to have people relocate here from Waltham or other places, people were very open to and excited about coming to Providence. And then the last thing I'll say is just the openness of the city and the state. As we approached them and had conversations, it was really clear they wanted to drive new businesses to come here, to hire people, to grow the economy. And we want to be part of that story. So our belief is there'll be lots of other companies coming here as well. And there are, and we want to be part of that growth engine.
It's also interesting to me, and you read about this as a trend in the business world, that you're putting, we're talking about 125 workers, people, as you said, making calls and stuff. That's the kind of thing you would have maybe expected to be in the suburbs a decade or two ago. Yeah. You're looking right now to keep that in the actual city, right? What's the thinking there? Yeah,
so we definitely thought about that. We even looked at some real estate a little bit further outside of Providence. It really gets down to what's most attractive for our potential employee base. So where do they want to come to work? What will get them excited? One of the great things about being downtown Providence is access to transit. So whether it's bus or train, or literally people who are coming across, taking a bike to work, whatever it might be. So we felt like it would give the most options for our potential employees to get to work. And then they really want to be part of that excitement downtown. And hopefully, again, that's a great economic stimulus to the city when you start getting more and more people in that concentrated area. But it was really about what do we think employees would want, where do they want to work, what's the real estate that would get them excited.
Now, as part of the wooing by those leaders that convinced you to come down, the Commerce Corporation in the state agreed to provide up to about $2 million in tax credits to Vistaprint. I'm sure you know there's always a big debate about those kind of government incentive programs. How big a difference did that make in your decision?
Sure. And obviously I can only speak to our case versus everyone else's, but it definitely made a difference. I mean, if you look at, I mentioned Boston is really expensive. Well, Providence is more expensive than other places as well. So as you start to lay out the different options, and as much as we liked Providence, coming in and saying, look, if you get to these thresholds, and to be clear, we're actually not getting any incentives until we hire 40 people and are paying 40 people. So even today with 15 employees, we're getting no benefit yet from the state. If you get to those thresholds, having a subsidy, quite frankly, leveled the playing field. And that's what, for us, really allowed all the other pieces of the talent, the community, the excitement of being downtown to really override and get Providence kind of over the finish line. So for us, it was a great deal because it was really no money up front from the state, but it's the opportunity for us to earn that over time if we follow through with our plans.
I'm interested, too, you're talking about the costs in Boston. I mean, Boston, people look enviously from Providence up to Boston, cranes everywhere, the way it's growing, just more announcements this week up there. But on the other hand, there's a downside, or at least it's not all roses because of what you found as you looked. You weren't sure it was the right move to the expensive labor pool and the expensive real estate.
Sure.
Is that coming up more in business conversations in the Boston area as the economy is so hot up there?
Yeah, and obviously you have to pull apart Boston into different areas. So whether you're, we're a little bit further out, we're on 128. There's other people who are downtown at the Seaport District.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different pieces. So within even the Boston area, we talk about that of the super high cost areas within Boston versus where we are, which is probably just high cost, not super high. So I think it starts to build that ring around there, which I'd say Providence is included in that, of, okay, if I move that further out, how much will I save, hopefully? And then what does that mean for the talent pool? And when do I get to that tipping point where it's worth it or it's not worth it to go? So I think there's going to be always that question in hot real estate markets, whether that's Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, and so forth. For us, it makes sense to keep a presence in both. So we're not abandoning Boston and Waltham. We're going to keep some hiring there, but we just want to expand it and have options, and in some ways options for our employees, depending on where they live and where they want to work.
So we only have about a minute left. When you think about the companies you're starting to deal with in the new division, somewhat new division that you're leading, what's the hottest item? What are people most into? Is it a phone case? Is it the old business cards? Is it something I wouldn't expect?
Yeah, it's a variety, and clearly it depends on the in the customer. So I'll give an example, and this is not a hot product, but it's a hot customer. So Lyft, which is the ride-sharing service, is one of our great customers. They're based out on the West Coast. We service them across the country. What we're selling is really these small just referral cards. Dumb technology. It's the simplest thing imaginable, but they're growing so fast, it's a huge difference. So that's where we're helping to enable their growth and being part of their marketing engine with a really simple product. On the other hand, we've got people who are using much more complex products and physical products. So for example, going to trade shows, you always need new products. Everyone wants something cool and fun, and if it's a phone case, it has to be a new style phone case, obviously. But what are the product innovation pieces that allow people to go to a trade show and show something that no one has ever seen before?
Interesting. All right. Well, Don LeBlanc, thank you so much for being here from Vistaprint Corporate Solutions. Don't go away, though, because coming up next, we're going to be talking with the author of A New History of Brown and Sharpe, one of the most famous names in Rhode Island business history, and why it mattered so much. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and now a segment I've been wanting to do for months, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm being joined by Gerald Carbone, I should say Gerald, his full name, but we all call him Jed in journalism circles. Longtime former Providence Journal staffer. He's now an author, and this is his new book. It's called Brown and Sharpe and the Measure of American Industry, and it's a history of that famous company, Brown and Sharpe. It's also, as I've been reading it, it's sort of the story of Rhode Island and Providence from the 1800s into the start of the 21st century. Really interesting. Congrats on getting the project done.
Well, thank you, Ted.
So I'm glad to have you here, and I want to make sure people understand, sort of set the picture for them. So some people remember Brown and Sharpe vividly. Some folks will be vaguely aware of it, not sure why it's significant. Some people might never heard of it. What's the significance of Brown and Sharpe?
Well, they were the first company, or at least one of the first companies, to apply armory technology, interchangeable parts to a civilian product, to something that was not a weapon. And that really made possible later developments in true mass production and really shaped modernity and material culture as we live it.
And it's hard because people now, it sounds so distant, but actually, I mean, it's like they were like the Apple of their day, right? Turning out innovations that were marvels to people.
Absolutely. Yeah, they had the same kind of synergistic partnership that Apple had between Joseph Brown and Lucien Sharpe.
And how prominent was Brown and Sharpe in terms of it's on the Rhode Island landscape when you think about Brown and Sharpe? How big a deal was it to Rhode Island?
Well, it was huge. For example, at their high water mark, employment-wise, during World War II, they employed 12,100 people in downtown Providence, where if you're going up Route 95 and you'll see the Providence Place Mall across the highway, it says the Foundry, that's an apartment complex now. That's where Brown and Sharpe was, and that's where more than 12,000 people reported to work every day in the 1940s.
And that whole complex, the Foundry, the Promenade, that was all Brown and Sharpe buildings up till they moved out in the 60s, right?
37 acres, yeah, a couple of dozen buildings.
There you go, and we're seeing it right now. I think this picture, this is in your book, this is in the 1950s, and I got to thank the Rhode Island Historical Society for all these photos. So just, it was a huge, because it started out as a little shop, right? It started out as just a little, he was fixing clocks.
It was a little father-son shop. Yes, it was Joseph Brown and his father David repairing watches, making clocks, making the huge tower clocks. They still can see examples of it at the Old Colony House in Newport. That's a Joseph and David Brown clock, and there's one in Warren still operating too. But yeah, they were basically clock and watchmakers, made tinkered with jewelry.
So what was the biggest surprise for you in researching the book? I know the Sharpes actually came to you with the idea because they wanted their story told. They had all this information, and I know you said you weren't 100% sure, but you decided to go into it and then got really into it. What surprised you?
Oh, there were a lot of surprises. Just so many fun stories to follow and sing about. But a major surprise to me was just how much of an effect this Rhode Island metals manufacturer had on the world. And I wanted a title for this book. I wanted to call it Brown and Sharpe, the company that shaped the world. And the publisher said, no, that's too hyperbolic.
A little too much.
Yeah. And I said, but in retrospect, I don't think it is hyperbole. I think that this company, including a product that Hexagon Manufacturing, which bought Brown and Sharpe, still manufactures here in Rhode Island, continues to shape the automobiles, the airplanes, the aluminum cans, so many things that we encounter every day.
Yeah, I mean, the list of things you mentioned in the book, they had a role in making or advancing bicycles, barber clips, guns, cars, on and on, a whole different assortment of things, all because they were making machine tools which let other people make the machines that you'd end up buying, right?
Correct, mostly, yeah. They made a few of their own products. You mentioned barber clippers.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, they added electric current to that. And so when you go to a barber today, and that bumblebee buzzes by your ear, in fact, I need one. That basic the metal, the action of the cutting end of that, one rake kind of sliding sideways across another rake, that's their invention. It's just electrified.
So it's amazing to me how embedded Brown and Sharpe was in the economy here. Just a few months back, we had the head of the Rhode Island Manufacturing Association on, and he said he still thinks the manufacturing industry in Rhode Island hasn't fully replaced the pipeline of training that Brown and Sharpe offered. Did you find that in your research, that Brown and Sharpe had a spillover effect to the other companies?
Oh, absolutely. Their apprenticeship program was world famous and incredibly detailed. When they took a boy, it was always a young white guy, 16, 17 years old. When they took him into their employ as an apprentice, they followed that boy's progress from age 16 to 20 meticulously. He couldn't use tobacco, couldn't get married, and they taught that young man how to be a really, really good machinist. And then they drew for the managerial staff right into the mid-60s, all came out of the apprenticeship program. So so you could have a guy who graduated from North Providence High School running their plant in England and having tea with the Queen, and he went through the apprenticeship program.
A long way from North Providence,
yeah.
where you're getting tea with the Queen. We were talking about the foundry. So the biggest moment of Brown and Sharpe was World War II. You said, how many were they at?
Over 12,000.
Over 12,000 people. How long were they? We know that the company went into decline in the 80s and 90s, and then, as you mentioned, was sold to Hexagon in 2001, who's still down in Quonset, actually. Was the company strong, well into the 80s and 90s? When did things start to not be as strong for the company?
I would say mid-1970s. Yeah. It was certainly very strong in the mid-1960s. As far as a place for the middle class to work, that was probably its peak.
Yeah.
Those people were doing a lot better than the people in World War II were. They were just kind of going in, and filling a role. Whereas if you were at Brown and Sharpe in the mid-1960s as a machinist, you were making the equivalent of $80,000 a year now. And what you needed was a high school diploma, some good math skills, and an apprenticeship. And well, by that time, the apprenticeship program had largely gone by the boards. But yeah, so and they employed several thousands of people. So that in 1965, when they first moved to North Kingstown, they said, gee, we need 600 new machinists, 300 brand new and 300 to replace retiring workers. So in that year, they hired 600 people making the equivalent of $80,000 a year for manufacturing jobs.
And I love another sign of how embedded the company was in Rhode Island. There's a picture you have in there of the groundbreaking or the ribbon cutting or tape cutting they had for that building. And then Governor John Chafee is there, who is was he the great-grandson of the founder?
John Chafee was was he grandson or great-son? Yes, great-grandson.
Either way, he was a few generations down,
sure.
Tied up the Metcalfs.
His great-grandmother was Lucian Sharpe's daughter.
Now, one thing people are going to think of when they hear me talk about the companies, they think of the strike, the very famous 1980s epic, bitter strike.
Yep.
But you actually, when you read the book, you have a little bit of a different take on whether people think that was what caused the decline of Brown and Sharpe. You don't agree. The strike wasn't good, obviously, but you don't agree that that's what happened. Why?
Well, what closed Brown and Sharpe's machine tool line was United States public policy. It had really nothing to do with the strike, which is kind of a sad thing that for both sides that all that was done in vain. They were basically two dogs fighting over a bone, and meanwhile, other forces came in and stole that bone. Even supposing the union had said, you know what, we like this contract, and it was a very generous contract. We did 33% raise over 3 years. Yeah, we're going to take that.
Yeah.
So they take it. They still would have been on the unemployment line within a year and a half. Their unemployment check would have been a little bit bigger than their striker's check was, but the machine tool industry collapsed in 1982, which just coincidentally was when they were out walking the lines. But 1 in every 5 machine tool workers in the United States lost a job that year.
Interesting. So I highly recommend the book. You'll learn a lot about Rhode Island history. You'll learn a lot about industrial history. It's really good. Brown and Sharpe and the Measure of American Industry. Gerald Carbone, thank you for being here with me to talk about it.
Well, thanks for having me, Ted.
And thank you for joining us this week on Executive Suite. We'll see you back here next week.